unmute your line.
Welcome to our live webcast, The Neuroscience of Effective Events. Thank you for joining us. My name is Courtney, and I will be the operator for today's presentation. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of this web event technology. At any time, you can adjust your audio using any computer volume settings that you have. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a text chat window. There is a large window that holds all of your sent messages and a smaller text box at the bottom where you can type in your questions. To send a question, click in the text box and type your text. When you are ready to send your question, click the Send button. All questions that you submit are only seen by today's presenters. Your questions will be responded to in the order in which they were received. During the presentation, you will see multiple choice polling questions about the event. To participate in the poll, please select the button next to the answer that best represents your views or experiences. At the end of today's presentation, we ask that you please complete a brief post-event survey, as it will help MPI plan future web events. Lynn Randall is the lead strategic event consultant for Maritz. Lynn heads up Maritz Travel Consulting Practice. With more than 20 years of marketing services, corporate event, and communications experience, Lynn brings multiple dimensions to the work she does, helping clients design effective event experiences. One of those new and interesting dimensions is the application of neuroscience to event design. Regina Gordon is Executive and Strategic Marketing Program Manager at Cisco Systems. For the past 3 years, Regina has led the team responsible for one of Cisco's most important leadership meetings. Regina was an integral part of transforming the experiences from a traditional in-person meeting to a blend or hybrid virtual model. Through Regina's leadership, Cisco has realized dramatic benefits from this transformation while continuing to achieve its primary goals for the program. At this time, I would like to turn the microphone over to our speakers. Lynn and Regina, you may begin.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Courtney, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We have an awesome group, a large group of people, so I'm hoping that we get some participation with questions, and obviously we're encouraging you to get involved with the polling as well. So let's begin by sort of talking about this whole discipline. It's a relatively new discipline, and as I began to sort of dig into it, and I think, Regina, you probably found the same thing, is that understanding people from the inside out, I think, has really been underrepresented as a driving force in the events industry. So if you think about it, we spend so much energy, focus, and resource making sure that, the venue's right, the transfer time isn't too long, the food and beverage, F&B, and maybe the entertainment are ideal. And these are the disciplines of our industry that are focused on eliminating physical stress and discomfort around an event. So how is it that we spent so little time understanding what makes our minds uncomfortable? Well, hopefully we're going to correct at least a little bit of that error in underrepresentation today by exploring several different aspects of the event experience and how we can really increase impact by making some adjustments. So we talked about how, we really first started gathering together in groups focused around a specific purpose. That specific purpose back in the days of the caveman was, of course, survival. So over time, our tools became more sophisticated, and there were shifts of growing influence and inclusion and impact of things like even technology in obviously more recent times. So it is an important point to make, though. Virtual event technologies can never really fully replace physical gatherings such as the ones that we have within our industry, but it can definitely enhance and improve what happens when we are able to gather physically on site. And Regina is going to share with us a bit of her experiences with kind of both sides of that. So let's take a look at not only just the understanding of that evolution, but how we use what happened as we safely evolved. We gathered together in groups. We figured out that some people were good at some things, and they could bring that to the group and help them survive and flourish and prosper, and other people were good at other things. So together, we were much, much stronger than if we tried to go it alone. And so I think that that's the same even with challenges that we face today. Of course, the focus is very different, but people bring various strengths to a gathering of people, and we want to capitalize on that. The other aspect is really when we bring people together, it's about transfer. It's transfer of knowledge, transfer of belief, transfer of passion. And so how do we optimize and make the most of that transfer, or make the most of that transfer between people? So I started talking a bit about virtual and technology and those sort of aspects. And I think it's important just because it's such a huge trend within our industry. But I also think it's really interesting for us to talk about in terms of the neuroscience of what is happening in our bodies with the use of the internet. So if you think about, we have limited capacity, limited time, limited resources to go out and gather sometimes an overwhelming amount of information that's available on any specific topic or challenge or area of focus. So as a society, what we've done is we've turned to the efficiency of the internet to help us gather up that information. And, again, as I talked about on the evolution slide, our tools have vastly improved over time. And it's changing us as humans. It's changing the way our brains process, think, read, gather information. So we used to think that the brain was kind of set and got to a certain age and you were kind of just going to learn everything that you could. And, it's the old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But the reality is, with this more recent studies, neuroscientific studies, what they have found is that the brain never stops changing. So the human brain is almost infinitely malleable. There was a study done by James Olds, who was a professor of neuroscience and directs the Krasnow Institute for Advanced Study at George Mason University. He says that the adult mind is very plastic. So nerve cells routinely break old connections and form new ones. So what that means is our brains are constantly reprogramming themselves on the fly and altering the way that they function. Now, the reason that this plays, this knowledge and understanding of how our brains work play a role for us is that it definitely has an effect on how we deliver experiences within our industry, within the events industry. So this constant brain reprogramming means that the Google effect changes how we think. The internet is this universal medium, and it's a conduit for most of the information, actually, that flows through our ears and eyes and into our minds. So, my mind now expects, your mind now expects, to take in information in the way that the internet distributes it, in a swiftly moving stream of particles. So think about, when was the last time you just sat down in a comfy chair and read an entire book, deep dive on a subject? It was probably the last time you were laying on a beach or, on vacation. So what that means for us in our industry is that as people's minds become attuned to this crazy quilt of internet media, traditional media, communications, marketing, our events have to also adapt to those new expectations and the new ways that our brains are programmed and accept information. So at this point, what I'd love to do, Regina, is ask you to sort of talk a little bit about your experience, because you really did integrate completely and fully the power of the internet and, incorporating a virtual event as part of the program that you ran.
Yes, that's correct. So, traditionally, well, just to give you some background on the event, so this is really our annual kickoff for our leadership at Cisco, and this is a time where our CEO basically gives his fiscal year strategy and really delivers all of his messaging to ensure that the leadership aligns to it for the next fiscal year. Traditionally, this has been an in-person meeting. We used to hold it in Monterey and San Francisco. And then a couple of years ago, when we were all feeling the pressures of the economy, we were asked to take the entire event virtual, which meant no physical space, no F&B, nothing like that. And quite honestly, at that time, even 2 years ago, there was very little information that we could even get on what delivering a virtual event of this magnitude would would look like, and what best practices were and things along those lines. So we were really playing a little bit of a guessing game in terms of ensuring that we were getting it right. And the first year, what we were really focusing on is, how do we just ensure that, really we didn't break anything, we weren't putting too much stress on the network. I mean, we had to completely shift our mindset from, how do we move from just, reserving event space and things along those lines to really partnering with our IT teams and making sure we weren't overstressing anything. And the first year we were really successful in terms of delivering the content. The leadership really felt that they were able to still learn a lot from the information that was delivered. From that perspective, we really achieved our goals. But as we looked at the feedback that we were receiving after the event, we realized that, we were successful in delivering the content and in helping people to align, but at the end of the day, we were still missing the mark on a lot of these other areas like inspiration, recognition, networking, things along those lines. So as, in line with what you were saying earlier, Lynn, virtual can't ever replace completely the live components of an event, but it is really kind of an enhancement that can be made, which in the second year is really where, we really looked at the neuroscience and said, how is it that people's minds work? How do we design this event to ensure that we're not just delivering content, but that people are still walking away really feeling valued and recognized and still feeling connected to not only the content, but also the leadership team as well.
So, a couple of interesting pieces and elements to that. I think as we worked together that first year, Regina, you were kind of a pioneer. You didn't have a whole lot of other places to turn to say, okay, who else has done this? Where are the best practices? And so, as a team, we looked at what are related studies, research, areas that we could pull from. And that's, I think, really where you probably, kind of perked up, I think, when I brought in the concept of neuroscience and how that plays a role. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I still remember the first fact you gave us kind of based on neuroscience about the whole attention span thing, make sure you engage your attendees every 7 to 10 minutes and things along those lines. And I mean, just from that point forward, I'm like, there's definitely something to the neuroscience for events. And to be very honest, when I first heard the word neuroscience, it was very intimidating to me. I didn't think that I didn't think I had the brain capacity to even understand what it meant. But when you kind of uncover, the word neuroscience and you really look at the research that you can compile in order to really enhance the way that you're designing your event, I mean, there's no question about it. It's really the only way to go.
Yeah, I mean, to me, neuroscience just means understanding people. How do people tick? What makes them tick? So you bring up an interesting point, which is about every 10 minutes you need to do something. So right now, we are going to do that. We're going to open up a polling question. And so we are hoping that everyone participates. The first question is, this is something that as an industry we often talk about. So in order to inspire and motivate attendees, we have to be together in person. True or false? We're going to give people a couple of minutes to respond to that. And in the meantime, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about that. So if we can, yeah, there we go. So the human need to celebrate and motivate really does require, and I guess I shouldn't tell you exactly because we're still getting responses in, but I'm going to give you a couple more seconds. But there is a biological reason that inspiration and motivation are more powerful one way than the other. And I'm very intrigued by the responses that we're getting in terms of true and false. And we can talk through a bit of the reasoning behind this. I'm going to give you just a couple more minutes for responses, but it looks like we're going to get the most of them, the majority of them in right now. So let's go ahead and close out. Should we go ahead and close out that poll? All right. So a very large percentage of you felt that it was possible to inspire and motivate virtually versus physically and in person. However, and Regina spoke a little bit to this just a second ago, if your primary goal is really motivating and inspiring reasons, inspiring people, there is something biological that happens. So recently, actually, Regina and I have spoken on this topic in a couple of private events. And what I did at one is actually I called her up. Do you remember this, Regina? I called
do.
you up. I said, okay, play along with me. We are now going to celebrate Regina's success. So, Regina came up to the front of the room with me, and I said, okay, everybody, let's thank Regina for her contribution. And if we were, together in person, I'd give you a pat on the back or a hug and maybe even a champagne toast. And everyone would applaud. So, imagine that everyone on the phone there today is giving some applause. Well, of course, we can't do all of that virtually, but I can tell you that when we had this demonstration in person, things happen differently. So right now, you had inputs coming from your sense of sight and from the audio, from your sense of sound, from two places. So if you're deconstructing, or if we're deconstructing right now what's happening in our brains with that physical experience that I described, first you need to kind of understand that everything that we experience, everything that comes into our brains enters our body as an electrical impulse. So we all just, or especially if we were together, we did all just receive electrical impulses from sight and sound. But if Regina was next to me and I was giving her a hug and maybe we had some champagne, she would have had electrical impulses from sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. So I could have possibly maxed out those inputs with this champagne toast if I'd added that element. And what would have happened is then, for some reason this slide has got a little flip-flop copy on it. It's maybe entering my brain backwards. So it enters through the spinal cord. You feel it first. So it enters and goes through your limbic system, which is where your emotional center is in your brain, and then moves into the frontal lobe. So way up in the front. So everything that we experience, you feel first. You feel emotionally before you ever can process it at the front of your brain, which is the rational piece. Now, again, applying it back to events, this means that if you think about all of those electrical impulses and the additional electrical impulses from multiple senses, bringing things in and all of those electrical impulses entering through your spinal cord, that energy of the crowd, that's a real thing. It is electrical energy in the room. And it electrifies us. That's why when we're at sporting events or concerts or things like that, there's this kind of just sense of elation that rolls through a crowd because it's contagious, all of that electricity that is transferring from person to person. And so that is why there's so much more power when we're trying to motivate people and inspire people, when we're engaging every single one of their senses versus maybe just one or two that are possible to engage via a virtual mechanism like the one that we have today.
Yeah, Lynn, if I can just jump in with an example of that, of how we kind of applied it to our program is, so as you know, this year we focused a lot more on recognition for our program as well. And, the first year was very much more all virtual, and the second year was more of virtual and also physical locations. And we also did some competitions with our attendees that really kind of stemmed this this energy around the program. And those folks that won, we actually gave them kind of a year pass to the senior leadership meeting, which happens quarterly. And the first time that the attendees came into that meeting, because this is the senior leadership meeting is a meeting with VPs and above, and we had our directors invited in that won from our event. And the first time they attended in the room, we had them all stand up, and everybody in the room kind of applauded and just welcomed them to the meeting. So you could see on those people's faces, those that won that opportunity, just how much pride they felt and how good it felt to actually be in the room with the senior leadership, getting applauded, welcome to that table and that forum to really have the strategic discussion. So it was definitely a huge perk for them, if you will.
Well, and such a boost of energy.
Absolutely.
Just
Yeah.
very, very different. And I'll embarrass you just for 2 seconds because there's another example from last year's event, which is that you and another person
Oh.
on your team were actually called up on stage and got applause from the crowd and recognized publicly. And so, you really do. You feel that sense, that sense of emotion and all of that electricity coming through, right? You personally did.
Yeah, and now I'm even feeling embarrassed because you didn't warn me you were going to give that example.
Well, recognition. It's always good to be recognized, I think. Um, So we talked a little bit about that neuroscience, about how to inspire, how to motivate, and adding those elements, even with Regina's excellent example of how that might work in a real life setting. There's another aspect, which is the social piece, and almost all of the events that we have really have an element of networking or collaboration or even rapport building that occurs. And although recently there have been some encouraging discoveries around social networking, just like the Google effect that we discussed earlier, people are learning more and more every day about our brains and how things change. We're still sort of trying to figure out how effective networking and building rapport can really work virtually. So first of all, we know that we have to break down a crowd, which is processed in our brains as one large mass of people is one large thing. But there's also an element that I alluded to when I was talking about evolution. So our evolution as humans occurred safely because we could look people in the eye, we could understand if they were a threat. Actually, in caveman days, it was, are you a threat, are you a meal, or are you an opportunity to mate, were the three things that we cared about when we were evolving from the caveman days. But we talked about, how we would gather together in these tribes or these troops, and oftentimes people that came late to the party or late to the tribe were considered as outsiders, and they were considered as threats. So, once they met everyone, they shook hands, they knew they weren't a threat, didn't have a weapon, etc., it allowed them to join in or become part of that group. And that kind of hard wiring is really the neuroscience of our human nature. It is a very, very different thing, and you probably have experienced this yourselves, meeting someone online. Those of us who were single, I was single for a very long time, doing the whole online dating aspect. It's a difficult thing to build that trust virtually without the ability to look someone in the eye. You can start it, but it's a difficult sort of a thing, and it's because of that hardwiring that's part of our nature. So in order to build rapport, we can start the process organizing, getting people together, but it really works best if there is some sort of a physical experience or physical exchange. There's another component to this, which is that aspect of collaboration and social capital. So think of social capital as creating stronger networks and communities. These, in the evolutionary parlance, the tribes and communities that were built. And this is where the kind of hybrid or multifaceted approach that Regina just described that they used in year 2 of her program is really incredibly effective. So in order to, it's not just about building trust, but also increasing a sense of mutual responsibility. So this social capital is really a critical element of that. And it can again, it can begin in advance of a physical experience if you have some sort of a virtual space before your physical gathering, or you have some sort of scheduled interactions around a common challenge or community of focus. If you allow your attendees to self-select into an interest area that is personally relevant to them, and then identify other people within that group or that community, they will seek them out, and you can, of course, create spaces for that when there is a physical gathering. There is research that's been done on this, on the concept of increasing social capital. There was a 1998 study that was done by Nahapiat and Ghoshal, which I always say, that's true because I couldn't make up those 2 names. But so individuals have a need, an innate need to perceive themselves to be part of a network that's larger than themselves and their sort of immediate family or immediate relationships. Individuals identify themselves with the organization and have that sense of belonging, which creates that sense of comfort. Now I'm part of a community that's going to help me survive, that's going to be there for me when times are tough. So that need to belong is a well-accepted, well-documented, and well-researched psychological and sociological reality. Our physical event experiences are the best at providing that sense of belonging and identification because, again, you have that whole visual input and you are looking at people and shaking their hands and creating a different bond with them. There's also something that is gratifying about being able to physically see your community within an event setting. So you can almost visually verify, I belong, I'm part of this large group, and that you're all pulling in the same direction. So I think that this speaks to a bit of the trend that we're seeing on the increasing importance of corporate social responsibility in our events industry. I think it's evidence that we all really desperately want to feel that we're contributing to a greater good and that we're part of a larger group of people that is doing something that's bigger than ourselves. So there's a thing that happens in our brain when we meet someone new. So we connect with someone, or we're with this group of people that's part of our community or our network, our social capital, as we're building our social capital. And what happens is that we release oxytocin. Not OxyContin, that painkiller, Regina. It's oxytocin. I'm teasing. Oxytocin is the hormone that triggers a mother's labor and delivery, which really fosters that bond or begins that bond between mother and child. But it also triggers other types of trust behaviors and coupling and those sorts of things. So it's been proven that the release of oxytocin produces feelings of affection, contentment, calm. All of these really positive, powerful emotions are released by this hormone. And oxytocin, just because we say that it happens to be that the hormone that is released between a mother and a child, males and females both contain this hormone, and it remains dormant and stored in our brains and in other parts of our bodies, but it is released when you meet someone new and make that social connection. That is what creates that release. And there's all sorts of studies that have even been done about positive health benefits. So the more oxytocin that is released, the lower your heart rate is, the lower chance of disease that you have, et cetera. So really, really good stuff happens with this release of oxytocin. What's encouraging is that a neuroscientist by the name of Paul Zak has studied oxytocin and also social networking. And he really specifically focused around BlackBerry use, Facebooking, MySpace, Twitter, and measured oxytocin levels in people that did a whole lot of that sort of online social networking. And I really believe that these social networking tools facilitate, and in some cases can even replace some face-to-face sorts of conversations under the right conditions. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us in our events industry, and how can we put that understanding to practice? It kind of, while you think about that trust and contentment increasing, fear and uneasiness decreasing, it kind of sounds like what you hear in terms of the goal of brand loyalty, and that's something that companies strive to achieve in a lot of ways, and social networking being just one of them. But physical events and that networking time and the way that you structure your networking time to optimize the networks of people, connecting people that already have relationships or maybe old friends, and then also engaging people in meeting new individuals and expanding that network, again, focused around something that is of interest or a challenge to them.
Yeah, and I think, Lynn, just even in our second year of doing the virtual event where we went more hybrid, we really saw a significant increase in our post-event scores, because we did do a lot more of the physical kind of networking events. We had people gather to actually watch the presentations all around the world. And so, we definitely saw pretty much, increased scores, some as much as 20% increase post-event, I think simply just because we reintroduced more of that, physical interaction, that face-to-face interaction. And so it definitely makes a big difference.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that what we even saw, Regina, was people kind of sought it out even on their own the first year. And we encouraged, you encouraged people to go ahead and do that, maybe even get together at the end of the day for a little just social happy hour, that sort of stuff, to really reinforce Cisco's culture of teamwork and collaboration. And of course, you know, to release some of that oxytocin that will keep all of your people, your leaders happy and engaged and healthy.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what we hope, anyway, is happening in your brains during this session. And that is the learning cycle. And Regina, I know this is another one that was played a big part in your planning. So we'll talk a little bit about how we use this learning cycle to help
This
in
is one
your...
of my favorites.
Excellent, in part of your session design. So what happens when, as humans, we learn something new is that everything starts with that gathering phase. So we talked a little bit about these electrical impulses entering your body, and that is all part of that sensory input. So your brain consumes this sensory input, and that is gathering. Comes in kind of at the back of the brain, and that sort of, I mean, it's not as exact as the way that this image of the brain kind of depicts here, but after the sensory input is gathered up, what happens is we have a very passive period of reflecting on that sensory input, the stuff that we just gathered up. It's what I like to call sleeping on it. So we're not intentionally doing anything. It's kind of just running in the background. It's the little program that's running in the background. And so then after that rather passive period of reflecting, we actually take that information and start to make connections for ourselves. So we create those connections to our own work, our own life, our own challenges based on all of the input that we just gathered up and started processing in the back of our mind. So that moves our mental processing closer to the front, so in that frontal integrative cortex. And the cycle then has to do one more thing before that new information makes its way into our long-term memory and becomes something that we can actually continue to work with. And that is what they call the testing phase, the fourth phase being the testing phase. So that is anything active. So it could include taking notes, talking to someone, physically acting out a component of what you heard, writing a blog post, any sort of physical exchange or activity moves the information into your long-term memory and becomes something that you can then pull upon and act upon. So if we think about this as event professionals, it really can change the way that we design our events or even design our sessions. So we have to start with providing information that people then can access and gather in whatever way that they want to. So it could happen virtually in advance of the event. It could happen through a more traditional lecture-style session that is one day that might be followed by a more interactive, engaging, role-playing type of a session the following day. Then, once you've given people access to this information, you really have to give them time to sleep on it, which is why I say, the first day you give them the information and then they literally sleep on it, and then the following day they're able to make those connections for themselves and say, okay, here's how then this is personally relevant to me, this is how it affects my day-to-day job or my business success, et cetera. I think that whole gathering and reflecting process, I really love the inclusion of virtual technologies because I think that allows us to give that break that's required for people to reflect on it and start that process of moving it into creating. Then, when you're together, if you have a physical gathering or if it's only a physical gathering at your next day's session, you're really able to jump into that creation process and allow people to share the ways that they've made their own connections to the information that you asked them to gather and reflect upon. So once they've done that, even that act of talking through their connection, that act itself will complete the learning cycle. But, there are a multitude of other role-playing, games, experiments, puzzles, all sorts of tactics that we can employ that truly keep people engaged and interested and makes the best of what makes a physical gathering interesting, which is that exchange from person to person. So this is, one scenario, but I think that, Regina, you can probably talk through an example that you employed for your event last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely, this learning cycle right here really kind of drove our program design last year, where, we didn't want our attendees to feel like they were just sitting and listening to content in a one-way presentation for, 3 to 4 hours or however long it would be. So what we did is we really tried to help prepare them in advance of even our general session, of even the official launch of our event, by giving them some required videos to watch before the event started. So what this allowed us to do is to really give them the content that they needed to learn from and that they needed to receive. And then, as you said, kind of give them some time to reflect on that information so that they can come into their sessions prepared to ask questions, prepared to engage immediately with either their peers or with the presenters, which really, really worked well because it was no longer about having virtual sessions that was just a half hour of talking and then maybe a half hour of live Q&A, but it was pretty much a full hour of engaging conversation with our senior leaders and our director level attendees. The other way that we really did this is that, the first day of our program, we did do the general session, so we kind of designed the first day around giving them even more content. And then the second day was really all about get together with your teams, make those connections, really understand how this applies to you. So we employed some sessions called action forums, which was really an opportunity for, once they heard from, the CEO and, basically the entire CXO level team, they were able to think about, okay, what does this mean to me in my day job? Think about that overnight, and then the next day they met with their actual peers, whether it was 30 people or in certain cases 50 or 60 people, and have a live conversation about, like, okay, great, well, this is what I was thinking about what our CEO said, or this is what I was thinking we can do going forward in our line of business. And the feedback that we got on those sessions was just dramatically positive, where they really felt that these were the best sessions that they had in the virtual event space, because again, it really allowed them to feel like they weren't just receiving information and walking away and asking questions like, what does that mean to me? It really allowed them to answer those questions immediately and also make those connections again with their peers in that setting. So kind of going from giving them the information where I was gathering, letting them reflect, and then having those live conversations and making those connections, which was all around the creating and testing phases.
Excellent. Excellent, excellent. Yeah. So I think now what we'd like to do is open up our second polling question, because that was such a great recap of, making practical the information that we just heard. And so that second question is one that's maybe a little more direct and personal. So do you think that those of you attendees for this session today, current event design works with the way that the brain learns new information? And I'm very encouraged at the number that are saying, yep, I want to do that for the future. Well, maybe not right now, but I sure do want to do that for the future, which is really, really wonderful. So the next piece that we're going to actually walk through is another example that may be, it's a hypothetical example, but it's another way that this could work in real life with a sales meeting. I think, Regina and I tried to look at the types of meetings that people would have across various organizations or companies, et cetera. So we chose a sales meeting because that's something that almost every organization or company has, is a meeting that's much like a sales meeting or is exactly a sales meeting for their direct employees or their channels. So actually, I know you can't really see much of the slide behind us, but I want to leave that poll open because I think we're getting some interesting results in. And I'd love to find out who the people are that are already using this, because I'd love to hear your examples and some of your work cases, but maybe we can follow up on that at another point in time. And actually, I'd be intrigued by talking a bit to the people that are saying, that's probably not something that I'm going to change in terms of my event design, just to hear kind of the rationale and the thought process behind it. Because, again, people are fascinating. People are absolutely fascinating to me. So let's go ahead and close down that poll. I feel confident that with 75% that, Regina, we were able to at least inspire one or two people, or 75% of our audience today to do that. So yay, congratulations.
Well, and it's just an example. The learning cycle is just something that you take in everything you do, right? Whether it's event design, and it's just, putting together a presentation to just share something like this, it's all relevant.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
that I still take with me.
Yep, I completely agree. So in the hypothetical example that we have of how to take that information and use it in the design of a sales meeting, if you would incorporate some sort of a virtual event scenario, if you have something in advance, 3 months prior, put all of your one-way training, messaging, et cetera, onto a website. Doesn't have to be a virtual event. Can be your internal communications website. You might have something that's a specific place that your salespeople go to for all of their selling information. Could be something like your CRM system, something like that. So putting all that one-way messaging out there, ideally, if you can offer that up in several different formats, so a video that they can watch on demand, or a PDF, or a PowerPoint, just because people do like to take in information in different sorts of ways. And then immediately beforehand, just a couple of weeks beforehand, create speaker attendee sessions so that you can hone what happens on site and the engagement that happens on site to begin to move that learning cycle from gather and reflect to creating those connections with the information. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a virtual event platform. It could be that you just schedule chats because you know which people in your organization are going to be organized into which groups when you have your on-site sessions, and you may have even registered people, or people may have self-selected against certain things. So your speakers can schedule calls or schedule a WebEx or a webinar like this to connect with people and hone what's happening in those messages, so that then when you get into that physical gathering, you're able to really create exchanges, roundtables, do more of the developing games or role-playing, have working sessions where there's a challenge that the whole group comes together and solves real-time during that physical gathering. Open space conversations, that's another great way to make the most of what happens at that physical gathering on site. But then what we want to do, of course, is not just stop with that moment, but continue it on. And so afterwards, again, either a virtual event platform, your CRM system, whatever the communications, the most comfortable communications mechanism is that you have with your group of salespeople, provide them access to all of that material so that they can go back and review it and gather up a little more information, make some more connections, and then continue the conversations. So maybe schedule a few more chats with speakers or company executives if there were pieces that came out that needed further follow-up or development, and maybe a task force was created. All of that can happen immediately after to continue the process. And then once a quarter, have ongoing updates, product updates, et cetera. So I see that we are getting close to kind of a 15-minute. I wanted to be able to allow some time just in case people may have had questions that we want to ask directly. But before we do that, I want to kind of go back to the beginning of this session and what we started with, because I want to, again, revisit kind of those concepts about people, because really that's what we've been talking about. Neuroscience is a study of humans, the human mind. Social neuroscience is the way we socialize. So understanding and believing that, truly it's people that drive our business success. And if we tap into them, people have almost unlimited potential to achieve great things. And the way to accomplish those great things and to unleash that potential is through what we do in our industry. And that's a cool thing to understand in terms of the power that we have and the strategic benefit that we can bring to our organizations if we start to think about things in different ways and pull in some of these different sciences like neuroscience to the way that we pull together, design our events, et cetera. So think a little bit now, and I think what we might want to do is go ahead and push out that last polling question, because what I'd love for you to do is to think about what you might try yourself in order to integrate neuroscience with your own events design. And I guess, those folks that on the previous polling question said, no, I'm probably not going to try something like that. I guess you can opt out. You don't have to take a vote on this. But if you are interested in incorporating some of these pieces, tell me what inspired potential to unleash your attendees and the humans that you all pull together, their potential, and how do you plan to make that happen? There are a bunch of different ways. I just put together some easy thoughts on this. One of the things, and I didn't really speak specifically to it, but it's on the poll, particularly with virtual delivery of information, similar to what you've seen us use today. More visual slides and less typed slides tend to work much better for the way that the brain processes information. So you can't really read what's on a screen and listen to me speaking at the same time, because the way that your brain processes information in those two ways is exactly the same. So you're using the same part of your brain to read the type or listen to me speaking type. So, our speakers that tend to use these very type-heavy, rich, complex slides aren't getting their messages through to the people that they're trying to reach with those messages, or trying to transfer belief or transfer passion, because it's not sinking in. It's not going to make it all the way through. However, if a visual image is used with a piece of information, you're actually reinforcing the message. So it's a different part of your brain that comes together to bring that audio, what you hear me saying, and the visual together. And there have been studies that actually prove that if you just hear a piece of information, 3 days later you'll remember about 10% of it. But if you have a relevant piece of visual imagery that you incorporate with that message, 3 days later you will remember 65% of what was said to you. So that's a pretty impressive stat, and something that is an easy little piece of neuroscience for us to, well, I should say easy. I've actually worked extensively with speakers and coaching them on creating their slides in a different sort of a way. But it is something
that secret mission.
Yeah, I know. It kind of is. It's like my secret little project to change the way.
No, but you know what, Lynn? I mean, I think it's such a great example, though, because I think everyone knows that, less text on a slide, the better, right? I mean, I know at Cisco, I mean, we still need to get a lot better at that. And I think it's just a way that most presenters have become accustomed to. But I think this is another great example of, neuroscience sounds intimidating on its own, but when you really put it that way and you say, like, really people can only read or listen one at a time, so they can't read your slide and hear what the speaker's saying at the same time, that makes it so digestible, and it really makes a compelling case for the reason why you would use more visuals versus text on a slide.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. So I think we're going to close out that poll. And it looks like we at least influenced a few people to take the concept of that learning cycle and start to noodle around with the way that you might change your own events designs to incorporate that aspect. And the other element is what we just talked about. I find it really inspirational. I really feel like understanding more about what makes people tick is important because it inspires us. It will inspire us to create revolutions within our industry, like less type on slides and more visual imagery. That's a revolution. So what I'm hoping is that all of us on this webinar today can go out and inspire others with this vision, which is harnessing the brain power and passion of all of these people that we have in our industry that can really fuel our ability to design experiences that help people make the most of who they can be and get the most out of the experiences that we create as event professionals. So applying that understanding of people creates event experiences that makes our minds comfortable as well as our bodies. So at this point, I don't know if we have any additional questions that have come up. I'm looking on the screen. There is a PowerPoint. Well, yes, absolutely. We'll have a PDF version of the presentation today that we can send out. Also, if you have any colleagues that you think might be interested in what we said today, there will be a recording available so people can come back later and check out the recording. And then if there are any other questions, we'd be happy to take them. And otherwise, if you would like to chat with us, and Regina, this is the picture I didn't tell you I was putting onto this PowerPoint.
Dang it, you keep shocking me with these things.
I know. See, that's one of the ways to actually gain attention in the brain is to do something that's unexpected or
yes, you have my
shocking.
attention. Thanks.
So I've done that several times to make sure that I've gathered your attention on that. So if you have any more questions or you think of something afterwards and want to contact us, be sure to just send us an email. We would be happy to chat with you because it's a topic that both Regina and I find very inspiring, and I think I like to call it my nerdly neuroscience, but I think that I have converted Regina to a nerdly neuroscientist fan along with me.
Yeah, you have. You're the brainiac. You're the brain queen.
The cranium queen, that's you.
Oh, that's right.
So at any rate, thank you all very much for joining us today. And again, any questions, please send them on to us. And we appreciate your interest in this new discipline of neuroscience and applying neuroscience to make your
MPI would like to thank you for your participation in today's event, as well as your patience with us during the technical difficulties. A post-event survey will appear requesting your feedback. Please take a moment to complete this survey as it will help MPI plan future web events. This concludes today's program. Thank you and have a great day.